Senaria Eastwood was born into a family of aristocrats. Although her lineage was quite ancient, it had no power or money. The Eastwood family was only rich in debt. But despite all this, Senaria could become a princess. There were two princes in the palace. The bright brunette's name was Nolan. He was the son of a servant girl. The second was the green-eyed blonde Oliver. He was the emperor's son. He was the one who had the best chance of becoming the heir to the throne. The empress was worried that Nolan would take a girl from a powerful family as his wife and form an alliance against Oliver. To prevent this, the empress invited Senaria to her house. She wanted to marry this modest girl from a poor family to Nolan. The empress married Senaria and Nolan when they were 12 years old each. "I'm sorry, Nolan. You and I are the same age, so can I talk to you in a normal manner?" Entering the room asked Senaria to Nolan sitting on the bed. Nolan looked at the girl in disgust. "Oh man, he doesn't even try to hide his dislike," Senaria thought to herself. She understood why Nolan wasn't happy. He had been forced into the marriage, so he wasn't thrilled. "Do what you want, I don't care," turning away from the girl, said Nolan. "Well, great," Senaria shouted happily and jumped on the bed. "You know, I was so worried about this wedding, but now all my fears and worries are gone," said the girl, covering herself with a blanket. She saw that Nolan was upset, so she suggested him to go to bed. Sure, it was awkward for Nolan to share a bed with a girl, but they had no other choice. "If you're having trouble falling asleep, I can sing you a lullaby," Senaria suggested to Nolan. Nolan didn't like that the girl thought he was a little kid. The young man quickly threw back the blanket and jumped on the bed. "I don't like you," said Nolan without turning to look at Senaria. Although the girl was hurt by these words, she realized that he did not love her because of the empress. The woman constantly tormented him, insulting him every chance she got. Nolan couldn't answer her yet. Because he was disliked by the empress, the boy's childhood was tedious and lonely. Nolan didn't become crown prince until after the war. He returned to his homeland a hero. Thanks to his exploits, Nolan gained the emperor's respect. The girl was awakened by a voice. Someone was calling her name insistently. "Nolan, why did you wake me up so early? I wanted to sleep some more," the girl asked the young man in a sleepy voice. Senaria admitted to Nolan that she had a bad headache. The young man put his hand on her forehead and told her that she had a fever. Senaria asked him not to worry, but just go get the maid. The maid would get her the medicine she needed. When the young man left, Senaria fell into slumber once more. Senaria remembered her past life. About a year ago, as an adult, Senaria had been in a car accident. In the morning, she woke up in this body, in her past. It took a few months for the girl to accept the new reality. What was happening now, Senaria had already lived in a past life. The girl remembered that past life, she had been accused of crimes by her husband Nolan and was to be executed by his hand. This month, as in her previous life, Senaria received a marriage proposal from the palace. The girl was very upset about it. She was afraid that she would not be able to change her story. "We have to think of something to survive this time," the girl decided firmly to herself. Senaria had been in bed for days. No medication was helping her. "Senaria Eastwood, if you don't want to be the first princess to die a few days after her wedding due to a cold, then get up," shouted Nolan angrily. "If your body temperature doesn't drop that, you have a good chance of dying," said Nolan and slammed his palm on the bed. "Die? Maybe it's for the best. Maybe this way I'll go back to when I was an adult. Maybe I can change something there. I don't know what I should do now," Senaria thought to herself. Nolan leaned over the girl to give her the medicine. After a while, Senaria felt better. Her body was no longer aching. Her fever was gone. She sat up on the bed and looked around. Next to the bed on a chair, Nolan was dozing. "Damn it, why am I still in this body?" screamed the girl. "You're awake and I didn't hear you. I see the medicine worked," Nolan said, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "I want to go back. I want it all back. It'll be easier for me. I don't want the past to happen again." Without raising her head, the girl muttered. Nolan was surprised by the girl's behavior. He didn't understand what she wanted to say. "I don't want to say anything. Even if I told you everything, you wouldn't understand anything. And maybe you won't even believe me," Senaria said, and turned away from Nolan. "Fine! So this is your way of saying thank you to me?" Nolan shouted and jumped up from his chair. "What should I thank you for? For giving me the medicine? If you hadn't given it to me, I would have died. Why did you save my life?" Senaria muttered without turning around. Why are you thinking about death? Nolan asked the girl. I understand you're homesick. You don't like the fact that you're being forced into marriage. Those are normal emotions. If, however, you're homesick for your mother, your girlfriends, you can invite them here, Nolan suggested. No, you misunderstood me. The girl began to justify herself. Nolan didn't listen to her, but turned around and headed for the exit. Nolan said that if she wanted to, she could go home tomorrow. There was a knock on the door. Sonaria invited him in. 3 palace maids entered the room. They bowed their heads low before Sonaria and apologized for not being able to help her properly. Lies, Sonaria thought to herself. She knew that all maids are the Empress's people. Most of them are lazy, so other than the Empress, they don't want to serve anyone else. In their eyes, this girl had no value. The girl slowly approached the maids. She knew that indifference to her was a serious offense. One must respond in some way. Sonaria had a purpose. This time she wanted to live peacefully and eventually divorce her husband. Sonari walked up to the maids and slapped them across the face. The girl knew if she gave slack now and forgave the transgression, they would never respect her. Do you realize that because of your indifference, a royal person could have died? Shouted the girl. I am the wife of the first prince, chosen by the Empress herself. From the experience of her past life, Sonaria realized that these maids would turn their backs on her at the first opportunity. One day, she would become a pawn that they would try to get rid of. I will tell the Empress what happened today. In this life, Sonaria would achieve being feared and thus respected. The maids cried out, tearfully begging Sonaria's forgiveness, but the girl was indifferent to their fate. The next thing Sonaria decided to do was to find out her spouse's schedule. Nolan had a fencing lesson scheduled for today. And please get everything ready to go, asked Sonaria to the maid. The girl wondered where Sonaria had decided to go. After all, she didn't have any plans for today. I'm going to go to the Empress, Sonaria exclaimed joyfully. Sonaria bowed low before the Empress. The Empress admitted to the girl that she had heard of her ailment. She was glad to see that Sonaria was feeling much better. I also heard that it took you a long time to come to your senses due to the ignorance of the maids, the Empress went on to say. Does the Empress know why I came to her? The girl thought to herself in surprise. Let's think about how to punish your maids. How about we arrest them and imprison them for a few months? That will be a good lesson for them. With a sly grin, the Empress asked. And by the way, I can be more useful to you than a servant. If there's anything you want to know about your husband, you can just ask me. I know more about him than any maid. Sonaria sadly realized that there is a spy of the Empress in every corner of her house. They tell of the girl's every move. But still, Sonaria decided to act. This time she would be more cunning. Sonaria told the Empress that her husband was skipping classes. I know that. At his age, it's normal. On top of that, he was born to a servant girl, and servants' children are always lazy. The Empress calmly replied to her. But you don't know the main thing. He's just skipping classes for me. Nolan is going outside the castle. Sonaria knew that the Empress was influencing Nolan's education. All the teachers chosen by the Empress and not teaching Nolan with quality. Nolan has to go outside the castle to find a worthy teacher for himself. Nolan peeked out from around the corner to see if there was any suburbanization of his journey. The boy quickly jumped over the fence and ran toward the cliff. You're late today, said the waiting teacher. He handed Nolan a brown cloak. Surveillance on Nolan intensified, so the guy had to hide all the time. Nolan ran away from the palace each time to meet the mercenary soldiers. In the future, they would become his friends and loyal knights. Sonaria knew that from these men, Nolan was learning how to use a sword. In time, he would become a true professional. Sonaria also knew of the Empress's plans. She dreamed of killing Nolan during a battle in the future. Where did you get information that even my people don't know? The Empress asked the girl. Sonari couldn't admit to the Empress that she had already seen the future and knew how it would end. So she said that Nolan was still a child, and any secret could be easily extracted from him. You're lying. That paranoid little man would never admit it to you. The Empress didn't believe the girl. Cenarius decided to walk away from the conversation. She told the Empress that she would always tell the Empress any rumors and gossip she had in her house. She would serve the Empress with all her heart and become her loyal eyes and ears. And you are more determined than I thought, replied the Empress to her. Cenaria's ruse succeeded, and the conversation was diverted. I have desires, and with your help, I want to achieve them. I'm tired of being a beggar. I want to live in luxury. I don't want to be just someone's wife. Raising her chin defiantly, Tsunaria said, "To be honest, you surprised me a lot. I didn't expect this from you. At the moment, you look like a young me." Without hiding her surprise, the Empress said, "I like your attitude. We'll figure something out so you can go." The Empress summarized their conversation. The next person Tsunaria wanted to talk to was Nolan. The girl came to him for a fencing lesson. Tsunaria decided to have a small picnic for her spouse. "Class over," the girl called a surprised Nolan over to her. "What are you doing here?" the young man asked her rudely. "You see, I want to help you succeed. I've come to you to discuss any misunderstandings we have between us. So have a seat at my makeshift table." Tsunaria answered him with a smile. "I want to talk to you about last night. You really misunderstood me. I do not wish to die, but rather I wish to live a long, happy life. It seems to me that you hate me because the Empress chose me to be your wife. I didn't benefit from your death. If you had died, I would have had to dispose of your corpse," Nolan replied in a serious voice. "I don't hate you," Nolan spoke without looking at the girl. Tsunaria did not know her husband well. She couldn't say for sure if he could leave someone to die, someone he hated. Well, like all other people, he is always kind for his own good. "Before coming here, I went to greet the Empress," the girl told Nolan. "I know you are learning real sword skills. You found yourself a good teacher outside the palace, but the Empress has already begun to guess about it," Tsunaria whispered in Nolan's ear. "Now they will start watching you even outside the palace, so never show your real skills. In time, they might become an ace up your sleeve for you." "Tsunaria Eastwood, I don't know what you're up to, what you're doing all this for," Nolan began to say. "Not for anything, I'm just your spouse. I'll always be on your side," smiling sweetly, the girl said. Nolan walked through the woods with his head down low. He pondered the words his wife had said. He didn't understand what was happening, so it clouded him. Nolan's bad mood was noticed by Miller. He was a mercenary, a teacher, and a good friend of the boy. He asked the boy to tell him what was troubling him. Nolan confided in him that his wife had promised to always be faithful, to take his side in every situation. 100% it was the Empress who asked her to say that. Miller was skeptical. "You're probably right." With a sigh, Nolan acknowledged Miller's rightness. Nolan knew that Tsunaria had become his wife by order of the Empress. She was afraid that Nolan would marry the Duchess of Lancaster. That girl was from a powerful family, and if they married, Nolan's position would be strengthened. Tsunaria was literally the child who was sold to the imperial house because of her father's debts. The girl's family improved their financial situation by marrying their daughter to a member of the royal family. Nolan couldn't understand who his consort really was. Is she just a puppet in the hands of the Empress? Or a victim of circumstance? What is her true mindset? Whose side is she really on? "You know, this is kind of annoying me," said Miller, turning to Nolan. "What's wrong?" Nolan asked, surprised. Miller answered him that they were being watched all the time, someone hiding behind a tree. "Let's get away from them down this road," shouted Miller and hurried down the slope. Nolan remembered that Tsunaria had warned him that surveillance would increase. In this situation, his wife had been loyal. She had warned him. Tsunaria was introduced to the second Prince Oliver. He was 2 years younger than her and had a handsome appearance. He was not like his mother in personality. He was soft, kind, and cheerful. The Empress asked Tsunaria to look after her son. Tsunaria and Oliver decided to find Nolan. The girl noticed that a maid was following them. She turned around and asked her not to follow them, to keep her distance. The servant girl obeyed the order. After the servants learned that the Empress was on the girl's side, their attitude towards her changed for the better. Tsunaria and Oliver came to the tree and called out to Nolan. He'd been in that tree a lot lately. He liked to be alone. Nolan heard them. He jumped to his feet. Oliver threw himself at Nolan to squeeze him in a hug. He truly loved his brother. "Nolan, I really want to play with Hobby," Oliver asked his brother. Hubie is Nolan's dog. Tsunaria liked her too. The animal was large, fluffy, and very playful. They didn't get to play with the dog. Nolan was blocked by a maid. She said that it was today that Nolan and Tsunaria needed to spend time in the common room. Tsunaria had already forgotten about this custom. According to royal rules, newlyweds had to spend 1 day a month together in the same room. Scenaria and Nolan had been lying in silence for several minutes now. "Are you asleep?" asked the girl to break the silence. Nolan didn't feel like talking to her. He said he was tired, so he would sleep. The girl turned her back to Nolan. She decided that she needed to make friends with the young man. One of her goals was a peaceful divorce. If they quarreled or became enemies, it would not be possible to end the marriage peacefully. Scenaria was hiding in the park behind a bush. She had decided today that she would arrange a supposedly casual meeting with Nolan. Then she would suggest that he take a walk outside the palace. "What are you doing here?" The girl heard Nolan's voice beside her. "Oh, hey, the weather's so nice today, I thought I'd take a walk in the park. Maybe even get outside the palace." Smiling sweetly, the girl replied to him. "You probably want me to take you with me, don't you?" Nolan figured out her ruse. "Honestly, yes. But if you think I'll be a burden to you, or a hindrance to you, then you can leave me out," Scenaria said with some resentment in her voice. "And how did you know that today was the day I'd want to go outside the palace?" Nolan asked, squinting his eyes suspiciously. "It's simple. I didn't know that it was today that you would be going outside the palace, so I've been waiting for you here for days," the girl honestly admitted. "Okay, I'll take you with me. Just promise me you won't bring trouble." Nolan gave in under her pressure. Nolan took the girl to the town square. It was her first time here. Scenaria was fascinated by absolutely everything. It was the first time she had seen a blacksmith shop, bakeries, various workshops. Nolan took the girl's hand and motioned for her to follow him. He was afraid she would get lost in the crowd. "Potato tornado!" Scenaria heard the vendor shout. It had been a long time since she had eaten potato tornadoes. The girl turned at the vendor's voice. After a second, Scenarius realized that Nolan wasn't around. She accidentally let go of his hand. A little farther away, Nolan was nervously nibbling his hand. He had lost Scenaria in the crowd. The young man looked away for a moment at an aristocrat who might have recognized him and released the girl's hand. Miller arose beside the young man. "What are you standing there for? Let's go already," said Miller and waved his head to the right. "Yes, I should go after him. Today is an important day. All the mercenaries will gather together. Scenaria will find her own way home. She can go to one of the guards. They'll take her to the palace." Nolan reassured herself. "Well, what if something goes wrong? What if she doesn't find the guards? What if she stays where she is and waits for me? What if she gets into a fight or some other incident?" These thoughts caused Nolan to measure on the spot. "Miller!" the young man called out to his friend. Scenaria sat down on the ground in the middle of the square and waited for Nolan. She realized that the young man couldn't have gotten far. "Scenaria!" A panting Nolan ran up to the girl. "Why did you stay sitting here? Why didn't you go to the guards? Do you know what kind of chaos would have broken out in the palace if you'd gone missing?" With excitement, the boy turned to shouting. "Well, you came to get me out of here," Scenaria answered him in a calm voice. "What if I had decided not to look for you?" Nolan asked coldly again. "And this couldn't happen. You're not like that, you're good." Scenaria smiled back at him. Nolan took the girl's hand firmly and led her with a firm gait toward the palace. "And you mean to say that an important reason why the prince couldn't join us today was the girl?" asked one of the mercenaries. 5 years of living in the palace had passed almost unnoticed for Scenaria. She had grown accustomed to her new life and was not drawn back to the past. "There you go, you beat me again," said Oliver, who had appeared nearby. "Scenaria, you know our southern border is under attack by barbarians, right? My mother told me that Nolan will soon get to the front." With sadness in his voice, Oliver said. Of course, Scenaria knew that this was the year Nolan would go into his first battle. Since she had already lived this situation in the past, she knew that nothing would happen to her spouse. She tried to comfort Oliver, told him everything would be okay. But after all, this will be his first battle, and even though he's from the royal family, there's a good chance he'll be killed. The boy persisted. Scenaria patted him on the shoulder and told him that his brother would return from this battle a hero. It was in this battle that he would defeat his enemies, earn the emperor's trust, and become crown prince. "Look, you're such an optimist," Oliver said with admiration in his voice. After the incident in the town square, Scenaria and Nolan's relationship had improved, but it still wasn't marital. Their relationship resembled a strong friendship between two guys. The girl was annoyed that no matter how friendly they were, Nolan hadn't told her he was going to the front. Nolan told her you didn't want her to worry for nothing, so you kept silent about it. You misunderstand me again. I know you'll come back from this battle unharmed, so I'm not worried about you. I don't like that you left that out. The girl confessed to him. Unexpectedly for Nolan, the girl hugged him tightly. She realized he was worried. Going to the front at 17 is scary. Listen, why are your muscles so hard in that thing? I think it's from overexertion. Do you want me to massage you? Scenaria offered to Nolan. Unexpectedly to the girl, Nolan quickly jumped out of bed. Nolan took a quick step toward the exit. The girl called out to him. She didn't understand what was happening. Scenaria realized that no matter how mature Nolan seemed on the outside, he was still a child at heart. Walking out of the room, Nolan cried he was really scared. The Empress decided to throw a feast in honor of the prince's future victory. Scenaria didn't understand why they would throw parties to celebrate future victories, but she had no way out. She had to attend. The various balls and parties were tiresome for Scenaria. She could not fit in with society. She was confused by the fact that all the aristocrats spoke in hints, not directly. The girl knew that the court ladies were deceiving her. They were being nice to her, but she didn't really take her seriously. They were waiting for the moment when the prince would die in battle and she would be thrown out of the palace. Ah, that's where you've gone, Your Highness. I've noticed that you're not even anxious about seeing your husband off to war. How I wish I could be as cold-blooded as you. Gracie Lancaster appeared beside Scenaria. She was the one Nolan had benefited from marrying. The girl's words might have sounded like a compliment, but Scenaria knew that aristocrats never spoke plainly. They often lied. In fact, Gracie's words translated as, "You shouldn't have fun and enjoy yourself when your husband could die at any minute. Don't believe me if you want, but I'm sure my consort will handle everything. He will defeat all enemies and return unharmed." Scenaria replied, smiling. "Your Highness, you seem to be a very bright and optimistic person," said Gracie, but she was clearly thinking differently. It was clear from her gaze that she thought that Scenaria was stupid. How tired I am of smiling at these people, Scenaria thought to herself, but smiled nonetheless. With a little dance, Gracie stepped away from Scenaria. "Why do you look so sad?" Nolan asked Scenaria, appearing almost out of thin air. Nolan asked the girl to dance. The two of them got into a verbal altercation. Scenaria remembered that Nolan had recently promised never to dance with her again. The young man resented that today was his holiday, so everyone was waiting for him to dance with his wife. "Okay, I'm sorry if I offended you. Will you dance with me?" said Nolan to her and held out his hand. "I apologized. Are you happy now?" Looking the girl in the eye, Nolan asked. "Well, since you're begging me so much, fine," Scenaria said, and put her hand in his palm. "Did I see you talking to the duchesses?" Nolan asked the girl during the dance. It didn't feel like a conversation. Our communication was more like a strategic battle. Scenaria admitted to him. "I bet they all think I'm going to die at the front," Nolan said with sadness in his voice. The girl angrily stepped on Nolan's foot. "You just have to come home unharmed. At least do it for me. If you die, then I'll have to retire to the monastery," Scenaria exclaimed with indignation in her voice. Although Scenaria knew that everything would end well, Nolan's sudden outburst of depression frightened her. She worried that his mood might have a negative effect on the story. Nolan walked over to Gracie and asked her to dance as well. "They look good together," Scenaria remarked to herself. Scenaria knew that a fateful event would happen at this party. Nolan will notice Gracie. It will be love at first sight. They go together from the party to walk in the park. Then their affection for each other only grows stronger. Scenarius watched from the sidelines as Nolan and Gracie smiled happily. In order not to embarrass her spouse, Scenaria hurriedly left. The girl decided to stand on the balcony for a while. It was a glorious night. "You might catch cold. Cover up." Scenaria heard a man's voice behind her. Someone placed a uniform on her shoulders. The girl turned around. It was her husband. She asked in surprise what he was doing here. "Why can't I go out on the balcony?" Nolan asked her in a calm voice. "What about Gracie?" the girl asked him. "What does Gracie have to do with Gracie?" Nolan wondered. The girl stood still for a moment, not knowing what to say. Last time he'd gone with Gracie to walk in the park, he hadn't come to her. This time it was different. "Maybe I've got it all wrong," the girl thought to herself. Scenaria decided not to hide the truth from Nolan. She thought he was with Gracie. The girl had seen them chatting sweetly, so she figured they were having an interesting conversation. So you resented me because I danced with Gracie? You were jealous of me? Don't worry, I just greeted her as tradition demands. You should do the same with the other invitees, Nolan explained to her. Further events also developed differently. Nolan took a step towards the girl, hugged her tightly. He hadn't done that in the past. I promise you that I will return from the war unharmed, so you don't need to worry about the monastery. I'll come back to you no matter what happens, whispered Nolan in her ear. The girl hugged Nolan. She could feel him shaking with his whole body. A week after the party, Nolan went to the front. Liam, put on some decent clothes. The prince is coming here soon. We should show him our respect by looking neat, said Damien. Well, why exactly is our unit going to the front? Ethan asked. Nolan appeared in the doorway. Those present bowed their heads low. Scenaria decided to write a letter to her husband. In it, she tried to encourage Nolan and put him in a positive mood. Dear Nolan, I've heard of your victories at the front. The Emperor has been praising you unceasingly lately, Scenaria wrote. To herself, the girl wondered at the Emperor's attitude. He had sent his son to his doom and then rejoiced at his successes. If my brother reads this letter, he'll probably tear it into little pieces from embarrassment, said Oliver, peering at the letter over Scenaria's shoulder. Don't peek, Scenaria shouted and tried to push Oliver away from her. Without you, life in the palace is pretty boring, so come home soon. The girl finished her letter. Nolan was pleased to read the letter Scenaria had written. Nolan put the letter to his face. The paper smelled like Scenaria's favorite perfume. Do you know why the prince has such a wide smile? Asked Liam to Damien. It's common knowledge. He got a letter from his spouse, Damien replied to him. You mean he's married? He's only 17 years old, Liam exclaimed. Damien had told him that marriage between rich kids was a way out of trouble. The young men were talking among themselves, but they did not think that the prince could hear them. Nolan didn't like what his friends were saying. He slammed his fist on the table and ordered them to leave. By the way, I've heard rumors that the prince and his consort are longtime enemies, so this all looks pretty weird. Already outside the door, Liam said. Nolan heard the last words of his buddies as well. He realized that his entourage was suspicious of Scenaria. Nothing. I'll go back to the palace and resolve any misunderstandings, thought Nolan, covering his eyes. Mr. Emperor, news has come from the front. The first prince has once again won a resplendent victory. As soon as he took command over the army, the barbarians' luck began to drift away from them. If this continues, the enemies will be completely defeated in a couple years. Who would have thought Nolan would do so well at the front? Empress Eugenia thought to herself as she heard the report from the battlefield. How is our plan going? Asked the Empress to her faithful assistant Oscar. Don't worry, arrangements have already been made. Everything will end in the best way possible for you. Oscar answered her quietly. I need to find out that scoundrel's weaknesses as soon as possible, the Empress hissed angrily. Scenaria received a return letter from her spouse. Be sure to tell the prince that I received a gift from him, said Scenaria to the messenger. Excuse me, what's your name? The girl was curious about the bellboy's name. My name is Damien Barnhill, said the boy, turning around to Scenaria. The girl froze in place. She remembered the name. It was one of Nolan's friends. The girl decided that this man could be trusted. Would you mind taking a walk with me? I have something to tell you. I also want to hear some stories about my spouse, Scenaria asked as a favor. You see, I write quite a few letters, but it's extremely rare that I get a reply. I'm curious about my spouse's life. The girl confessed to Damien. Damien bowed to the girl and told the girl that he couldn't tell her anything. He promised the prince that he wouldn't tell anyone about his private life. The girl was not satisfied with this answer. After all, she had not asked anything secret. Then I'll tell you some secret information. Just promise me you won't tell anyone, Scenaria asked Damien. Brahms Smith is sure to betray the prince. He is already passing information to the enemy, Scenaria whispered in Damien's ear. Damien was extremely surprised. Brahms had known the prince since he was a child. Damien didn't believe that he could betray the prince. So you're saying you don't trust the prince's wife? Scenaria asked him. You may not trust me, but be sure to pass my words to the prince. Let his majesty decide for himself whether to believe this information or not. Scenaria asked him in a firm voice. This information I cannot convey in a letter, as all my correspondence is read by the maids, but I trust you. I hope you will honor my request. Very well. I will pass your words on to the prince. Let him decide what to do with that information later. Demian agreed. In order not to think about bad things, Sanari decided to do some chores. She wanted to visit the prince's palace to see if everything was in order. The maid didn't like the idea, asking her to take her time, not to make any rash decisions. Sanaria realized that something was amiss. The maid clearly didn't want the girl to go to the prince's palace. Sanaria swung open the gate and froze in place. The garden was unkept, the palace shutters long since painted. It looked as if no one was waiting for the prince to come home. Cenarius decided to check the books. The paperwork showed that primer paints were purchased. Even the cutlery was cleaned with various cleaning agents. This is bad. There's obviously something wrong here. Judging by the scale of the embezzlement, these people have strong patrons or friends in high places, said Oliver, looking at the invoices. Sanaria guessed who was the patron saint of thieves. The Empress was behind it all. She was sure that the prince would never return from the front. Honestly, we're not involved in embezzlement. The maids tried to justify themselves. So you're telling me that the people assigned to keep order have no idea what's going on in this house? And they're completely uninvolved in the embezzlement? Then who was doing all this? Oliver asked, crumpling up the invoices. Shivering, the maids admitted that it was Baron Julian, not they, who handled the financial matters. Oliver asked them where the Baron was now. He's out of town, Sanaria shared. Then I'm dismissing him. It is necessary to find another man to fill this place, Oliver said in a calm voice. You don't want to get into financial matters? Oliver surprised Sanaria with his question. Look, you're the prince's wife, so you have something to do with his finances. Besides, you're obviously a smart girl, so you can handle all the bookkeeping. Oliver tried to encourage her. I can't think of a better candidate for this role. I can't deal with my brother's affairs, as I have my own problems to solve. Oliver summarized. Sanaria ordered the servants to change all the cracked glass in the house, to wipe off all the dust, even in the attic. She promised to come back in a week. I've noticed that you've been doing some pretty interesting things these past few days. Have you decided to take up managing the prince's palace budget? The Empress asked the girl with her arms folded across her chest. Sanaria realized that her days of peace were over. From that day on, her life would be in trouble. The girl investigated and found out that Baron Julian was involved in the embezzlement, and he was the Empress's man. You see, there were rumors going around the palace that the prince's house was in ruins. I couldn't let that go unheeded. With her head bowed, Sanaria spoke. I didn't expect Baron Julian to be so greedy. He has forgotten where he belongs, the Empress said thoughtfully. It's probably a good decision to put you over the prince's house so that you're the one in charge of spending, the Empress concluded. Sanaria left the Empress's office and sighed with relief. Dealing with this woman had always been quite difficult for her. She couldn't wait for the day when the prince would return from the front and take her home. Brahms Smith tied a small letter to the bird's foot and released it into the sky. The whistle of an arrow was heard. The bird was killed. Miller, bring me at once the letter that the bird was supposed to deliver, ordered the prince. Prince was surprised to see Brahms in this place. Miller picked up the bird, took the letter from its paw. He read it aloud. It said the prince had been wounded in the shoulder. Who did you give that letter to? The prince's injury is classified information. That's why you were hanging around the barracks, said Damien to Brahms after reading the letter. Please forgive me, Your Highness, croaked Brahms. Nolan was saddened by the betrayal. Brahms always told him about his sick daughter, how he wanted to return to her soon. Nolan sympathized with him. The prince realized that it was impossible to leave him alive because there was no telling when he would betray her again. In remembrance of our old friendship, you will not suffer in the last moments of your life, Nolan said and swung his sword. Put Brahms' head on display. Let everyone know what happens to traitors, Nolan said in a calm voice. By the way, do you still think that the prince consort is just a puppet in the hands of the Empress, and that she can't be trusted? Nolan asked Demian. I think it's too early to relax. He could be just a decoy, just a pawn in someone else's hands. A consort can do such things to gain the prince's trust, Demian said defiantly. I spent 5 years with Sanari, so I can trust her. I suggest you do the same. Nolan stood up in defense of his spouse. She could have been playing you all these 5 years. Demian didn't relent. Damien, if you insult my consort one more time, you will not get away with it. I promise you that, Nolan said in a threatening voice. There's no way Cenaria has been playing with me this long, Nolan thought to himself. He didn't want to believe that he couldn't trust anyone. It had been 6 months since Cenaria had taken charge of the prince's house. The girl's life was quite measured. She wanted to add some colors to it, but she didn't know what to do. Every year after the harvest, the Empire held a hunting competition. Although Cenaria didn't change why such a waste, she still decided to attend the events. Even the prince's consort came today. Didn't anything happen at your place? Asked a passing Gracie. You must be very pleased that your husband is winning victory after victory? Gracie asked with a smile. Of course I rejoice in my spouse's success. Laughing, Cenaria replied. This conversation was boring her. She didn't like Gracia at all. You are too beautiful, Lady Lancaster. It hurts my eyes to look at you. Gracie was complimented by a man who appeared seemingly out of nowhere. I want to give you the most beautiful fox pelt today. The man continued to smile. William, but I was planning on catching a fox for myself today, so in time we will be rivals with you. See you at the hunting tournament, Gracie replied arrogantly. The man grimaced and hurried away from the ladies. Lady Lancaster, but that man's name is not William, it's something else, whispered Cenaria. Gracie replied that she knew. She did it on purpose. The man is hitting on her constantly. It's annoying. On top of that, he has a fiancée. He's being mean to the girl. There was a trumpet blast. It was the signal for the tournament to begin. Gracie hurried out of Cenaria so that she could prepare for the competition. Cenaria stared after the girl. Maybe her first impression was misleading, and Gracie wasn't really that bad. Cenaria had enjoyed talking to her at least. When the hunt finally began, everyone went about their favorite activities. Some hunted, some drank tea, but Cenaria played board games. The last game was a game of will. Cenaria had lost. Now she had to get a flower from the hunting ground. The maid was worried that the girl would go there alone. The maid asked Cenaria to take a bodyguard with her, as there might be mercenaries in the forest. Don't worry, everything will be fine. It's unlikely that someone hired an assassin to ruin me. Cenaria placed a hand on the maid's shoulder to reassure her. Cenaria enjoyed the walk through the forest. She rarely walked by herself lately. Usually someone accompanied her. Suddenly the girl's foot caught on something. Cenaria lost her balance and fell to the ground. The girl's leg was in a lot of pain. She twisted her ankle. Getting back on her own was out of the question. If Nolan were here, he would surely find me and save me. The girl thought to herself, wrapping her arms around her knees. And what are you doing here, Your Majesty? Riding on horseback, Gracie rode up to Cenaria. You won't believe this, but I'm a damsel in distress, the girl replied to her. And why did you decide to leave the guards behind? What if I hadn't found you? What would you do in your condition afterward? Inundated her with questions, Gracie asked. Unexpectedly for Cenarius, Gracie picked the girl up in her arms and carried her toward the horse. Cenaria rode her horse in silence, trying to comprehend what was happening. I thank you for finding me, finally thanked Cenaria Gracie. I just heard a noise not too far away from me, thought I'd go check it out, Gracie admitted. I've heard a lot about your hunting successes. It's impressive, and if you were a man, you would surely inherit your domain and be able to hunt there to your heart's content, Cenaria said with a smile. After saying that, Gracie froze in place. Cenarius thought she had said something unnecessary. Yes, you are right. If I had been born a man, she would have inherited all the possessions. But I was born a woman, so I have no right to have any of it. Lowering her head low, Gracie muttered, Don't worry, even if you don't have a title, you're a beautiful person in every way. Cenaria tried to cheer the girl up. I may be an amazing person, but so what? What advantages does that give me? Gracie asked angrily. Right now, to use the money, I have to ask my father's permission. After marriage, I will have to ask my husband's permission. I will never be able to manage money on my own. Gracie continued to be frank with Cenaria. Cenarius understood why Gracie wanted to marry Nolan. The prince was rather indifferent to what was going on around him. He would have reacted calmly if he had learned that his wife had started a business and was handling the money herself. The girl remembered that Gracie's eyes at the ball had read indifference toward Nolan. Cenaria realized that Gracie had never loved the prince. She wanted to marry him to be free of her father. Gracie handed Cenaria into the hands of the maids and hurried away. Thank you so much for today, Lady Lancaster, shouted Gracie Cenaria in the back. Your Highness, you can't command an army in such a state. Miller blocked Nolan's path. Why are you so eager to fight? After all, our enemy's army has suffered heavy losses. They won't be advancing anytime soon. Demian tried to reason with Nolan. Get out of the way. The leader of the enemy is still alive. We need to deal with him and the remnants of his forces, Nolan muttered. It's all about the princess, isn't it? A passing miller said quietly. Nolan was still able to track down the head of their enemies. He drew his sword to strike the final blow. What a shame I didn't expect to be caught by a child. When I learned that the army would be led by a young prince, I didn't believe it would succeed. You are a strong opponent, so chop off my head and take it to the emperor. Raise your status in his eyes, said the captive to Nolan. I know you were born of a concubine, so your position at court is rather precarious. My head will change things for the better. Mind your own business, I'll decide what I want to do, Nolan said in a loud voice. Okay, then I'll do this, said the captive and jabbed the knife into Nolan's side. Nolan grabbed his right side and began to settle to the ground. Death on the battlefield, that is exactly what the Empress desires. I cannot allow it. On top of that, I promised Cenaria that I would definitely return home alive. Nolan thought to himself as he lost consciousness. To diversify her leisure time, Cenaria decided to go to the theater. To be honest, Oliver, this is the 7th time I've watched this play. I'm bored with it all already. My life is boring and monotonous. Cenaria sighed. Good afternoon. What about today's performance? Anna Brillante was coming to meet them. Cenaria didn't like her, but she had to talk to her. That was a great performance. Cenaria forced a smile out of herself. Yeah, couples in love like the ones in this play are hard to come by these days, said Gracie with his hand on Anna's shoulder. Anna snorted and hurried away. It was a blow to Lady Brillante. Everyone knows of her strained relationship with her husband. Cenaria realized why Anna had reacted the way she did. What do you think about the play? Give us your opinion. The prince's wife should not be restrained, said Gracie as she stepped close to Cenaria. Without waiting for the girl's reply, Grace turned around and walked towards the dressing room, leaving Cenaria puzzled. I see you've made friends with Lady Lancaster? Oliver asked Cenaria. Not at all! The girl was indignant. A noise was heard in the corridor. Everyone started talking to each other. Hey, what happened? Asked Oliver to a servant running by. The first prince has sent the head of the leader of our enemies. The emperor is very happy about it. He's throwing a great feast. From now on, everyone will be busy preparing for it. The servant told me the latest news. So this is great news. Soon my brother will win the war and come home, Oliver said excitedly. Cenaria stood silent. She was staring at one point. Things were going differently again. In his previous life, Nolan was still fighting. He had not triumphed so quickly. In his previous life, Nolan went off to war at 17 and came back at 22. And now he's only 20 years old. Why are you silent? What do you think about it? It's great news after all. Why aren't you rejoicing? Asked Oliver to the girl. It's okay, I'm just shocked, the girl replied to him. Cenaria began to suspect that the scenario of this life was different from the events in her past life. Whether that was good or bad, she didn't know yet. The war was won in 4 years. Nolan sent a letter to the king to have a celebration in honor of the victory. All my plans have gone to shit. How did that bastard manage to survive? Empress Eugenia was beyond angry. There will be no celebration. Tell the prince that there is no money for big events right now. If he wants the good of his country, he won't have any celebration, ordered the empress to a servant. His Majesty has an important meeting, so you'll need to wait for a while, said Demian to the empress's servant. Nolan received the servant only 6 hours later. He asked what had brought the empress's servant here. Here's a letter from the empress. Damian held out an envelope to Nolan. Do I understand correctly the empress wants me to withdraw my request for the gala? Asked Nolan after reading the letter. You see, after a long war, the state treasury has been depleted. If we hold a celebration, I'm afraid it might have a negative effect on the country's finances. Bowing his head low, the servant said, I refuse, I will not change my mind. Remaining completely calm, Nolan replied. But your highness, for the sake of personal gain, you want to turn a blind eye to the welfare of the country? What is your gain? The servant didn't expect such an answer from the prince. He was afraid that the empress would react negatively to the refusal. How dare you say such a thing to His Majesty? Demian shouted in an angry voice. He stepped towards the servant to punish him. Nolan stopped Damian with his hand. He said that winning the war was not only his merit, but the rest of the soldiers as well. Some of them survived, some of them died. Those men should be honored. I want to walk down the street during the parade carrying a memorial plaque honoring fallen comrades. Are you against a ceremony to honor fallen soldiers just because of political gain? Ask the Empress. Perhaps this parade will be beneficial to her son in the future. To argue your desire for political reasons alone, I do not think it is correct. I think you are misrepresenting the Empress's intentions, replied the servant to Nolan's words. I'm not sure the disadvantaged families who lost their sons and fathers would look at this situation the same way you do. Nolan tried to shame him. If you have nothing else to say, you can go. Nolan ended the conversation. In the carriage, the servant thought to himself that the prince had changed a great deal. He wasn't like he was 4 years ago. Nolan had grown into a real man with a strong character. How dare he! It's so presumptuous! The Empress hissed angrily, having learned from a servant that Nolan had refused. He would lead the parade after all. This was all being watched by Scenaria. She tried to hide her smile so that it would not be noticeable how happy she was about the situation. The girl realized that the Empress's plans were ruined. The color purple was the symbol of this kingdom. Anyone other than the Emperor could only wear purple during a victory celebration. At the parade, the prince will wear the royal color. He will lead the parade. In this way, he will win the respect and love of the citizens. I should have killed him as a child, the Empress thought with hatred. She couldn't let Nolan's position grow stronger. Scenaria was also preparing for the victory celebration. She decided to embroider the family crest on Nolan's purple cloak. She wanted to make her husband happy. Although everything was going well, Scenaria was sad. She felt a kind of anxiety. The girl was afraid that as soon as the prince put on the robe, she would have to leave the palace. Something like that had happened in a past life. Yes, you can tell that this robe was embroidered by an inexperienced craftsman, Demian said as he looked at the robe he had recently received from the palace. They should have sent that robe as a gift. They're making fun of the prince, said Liam. Did the princess really embroider this herself? Demian said in an incredulous voice. Yes, she embroidered herself, said Nolan, who came up to them. It seems to me that maids would never do such ugly embroidery, Nolan decided to joke. To be honest, I expected the worst. This job is satisfactorily done, said Nolan, taking a closer look at the robe. The Empress tore up the invitation and tossed it toward the ceiling. Shreds of white paper scattered on the floor. A servant was watching all this from around the corner. He smiled gloatingly. At last the day of triumph arrived. The army arrived in the capital. Scenaria was not feeling well. She was dizzy. Her whole body ached. But she couldn't miss Christmas. The parade would start in a few hours, so she had to hurry. Scenaria felt sorry for herself for missing her husband's celebration. But she didn't have the strength to get up. Her body was too weak. Someone put a cold hand on the girl's forehead. She tried to open her eyes, but all she saw was a dark, blurry silhouette. Scenaria felt better only after 4 days. She tried to hide the traces of her illness with makeup. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't like her reflection. Oh, come on, there's that disgruntled face again. When you do that, you look ugly. A male voice behind Scenaria spoke up. The girl turned to the man. It was her older brother. I didn't know they let everyone into the royal palace without asking, the girl replied to him. You must have slept through your illness and missed the most important news. The king plans to annul your marriage and marry the prince to Lady Lancaster of the Duke's family. Said brother roughly grabbed the girl by the shoulder. Understand, you fool. The first prince is no longer the lousy sheep of the family. He is now the son the king loves more than anyone else in the world. And now, he will give him the best of everything. The brother went on to say. You called who a fool? That's first of all. Second, you're hurting me, so get your hands off me, Scenaria hissed angrily. You need to cling to the prince with all your might. You can't let him divorce you, shouted the brother, but still let the girl go. I know what you need to do. You need to get pregnant. He can't kick you and the baby out on the street. Think of yourself, said the brother, and put his hand on the girl's shoulder again. Scenaria pulled her shoulder out of his hand. She told her brother that he was intensely greedy. He always puts his own interests first, never thinks about her. He's just worried that he'll soon cease to be called a relative of the cameraman family. And anyway, I don't want to be an empress. If the prince wants to divorce me, I will do it without delay, Scenaria told her brother in a calm voice. Don't you understand? Once you divorce the prince, your life is over. You have only one way to go, to the monastery. You need to do whatever it takes to keep the prince. Brother tried to reach out to his sister. And what can I do? I can't keep the prince by my side by force. If he likes Gracie and wants to marry her, I won't stand in his way, Scenaria thought to herself. The girl felt tears welling up in her eyes. She was ready to cry. Raising her eyes toward the door, Scenaria noticed a male silhouette. Don't you dare turn your back on me when I'm talking to you, shouted the brother and swung his hand. The man sprang toward him with a quick step and grabbed his arm. I don't think we need your advice on our relationship, said Nolan, lowering his brother's hand. His brother was so frightened when he saw the prince that his legs gave out. He fell to the floor with a thud. I would appreciate it if you would leave us, said Nolan in a calm voice to Scenaria's frightened brother. I didn't have to ask twice. My brother took off at a run. Scenaria noted to herself that Nolan had changed since their last meeting. He had matured a great deal. Scenaria remembered that her face was in tears. She quickly turned away to wipe them away. Nolan hugged the girl from behind. I came back to you as promised, Nolan said in a whisper. Please forgive me, I couldn't come to your feast. Scenaria asked him for forgiveness. Nolan said the girl shouldn't worry about that. He hugged her even tighter. Nolan turned the girl around to him and squeezed her face with his hands. He noted that she still looked hurt. He wondered what had happened. I realized it was you who touched my forehead while I lay in delirium, Scenaria exclaimed. You know, I figured out why you're pale. You put too much powder on your face, said Nolan, looking at his hand. The powder was applied to hide the black eyes, the girl exclaimed. You shouldn't hide your face behind makeup, and you look beautiful without makeup, said Nolan, looking the girl in the eyes. Nolan and Scenaria came to the ball. The girl's thoughts were heavy on her mind. She felt almost like a divorced wife. She didn't know how to behave in that role. Nolan's knights also came to the ball. Scenaria was glad to see everyone. She knew they were good and loyal friends of her husband. Nolan was approached by Miller and wondered who was that beautiful lady next to him. Nolan called Scenaria his wife. Wow, so it's you, that lovely spouse we've heard so often and so much about, said Miller. Miller told Scenarius to take her spouse away for a while. Will it be okay if I step back? Nolan asked the girl. Scenaria stammered. It wasn't like she was a 10-year-old girl. Surely she wouldn't get lost in the crowd. Scenaria was approached by Oliver. He was glad to see the girl. Have you noticed how friendly the second prince and the first prince's consort are? It's probably all because the girl is close to the empress. But it seems to me that these two have an unusual relationship, whispered the court ladies behind their backs. Oliver heard this gossip, his hands clenched into fists. Scenarius asked him to calm down, not to make a scandal. There was no need to pay attention to what people said. What do you mean, ignore them? They're defaming your name. Oliver's anger flared up. It seemed very sweet to Scenaria. She grabbed Oliver's cheeks and asked him not to treat her like a child. Why wasn't she being treated like a grown-up lady? After a moment, Scenarius realized she had made a mistake. She shouldn't have touched Oliver. It would only make things worse, and the gossip would get worse. Oliver suggested that the girl go elsewhere. Scenaria came away from that thought sensible. Nolan entered the hall. He looked for the girl with his eyes, but he didn't find her. He didn't like it, because Scenaria had promised to wait for him. No, there's still something between the first prince's consort and the second prince. Did you see them socializing? And they went out together? And the strangest thing is why the first prince's wife is acting like this. She's got a husband back from the front. Nolan heard whispers around him. Nolan walked into the ballroom and froze in place. His spouse twirled in a dance in Oliver's arms. Nolan collapsed onto a real nearby chair and grabbed his head. What's up? What are you doing? Are you done with your business yet? Asked Nolan's approaching spouse. You must be mad at me for leaving? The girl asked Nolan. The guy proudly threw his head up and said that it was nothing like that. He wasn't mad at her. Scenarius realized that he was just as resentful as before. The girl took his hand and pulled him gently toward her. I'm going to go to the terrace, come with me, called Nolan to his spouse. You brought me here on purpose? To the place of that time? This is where you and I chatted before I left for the front, asked Scenaria Nolan. When I see you here with me, I finally realize that you're really back, the girl confessed to her spouse. You know, and what's going on around here seems unreal to me. To be honest, I didn't want to go to the battlefield at all, Nolan admitted to Scenaria. I even wanted to ask you to give up the throne so I could live in peace, Nolan went on to say. So why didn't you do it then? The girl asked him. I don't know, but it doesn't matter now because it's all in the past, Nolan answered her. Nolan stood in front of the Emperor's office. This was the first time he had come here in his life. When Nolan entered the study, he saw the Emperor, his mother, and Gracie Lancaster. He hadn't expected to see the latter at all. Nolan sat down next to Gracie. The Emperor asked if they knew each other. The girl admitted that she had known the first prince for a long time. Everyone knows that the Crown Prince's bride was originally supposed to be Lady Lancaster. I am very sorry that the marriage did not take place. You two look good together. What do you think about reinstating that treaty? Asked the Emperor. Nolan was amazed at what he heard. Your Highness, but the prince already has a consort. So how can I become his wife? Asked Emperor Gracie. The Emperor replied that there was a wonderful method of divorce. The Emperor will continue to speak. He said that Scenaria Eastwood did not have the background befitting an empress. She was an eyesore to the Crown Prince all along. What Nolan heard, he didn't like. His hands clenched into fists. There is nothing wrong with being married to a girl of low origin. We cannot kick out an innocent spouse. The people may not understand such an action. Nolan stood up for his spouse. And we won't just kick her out. We'll think of something. Are you sure your wife was faithful to you while you were at the front? Emperor asked Nolan. Nolan jumped out of his chair and slapped his palms on the table. He was annoyed by this kind of talk. I've only recently returned from the front and you're already starting to talk about such a problem. Can't we start addressing it later? Nolan asked in an angry voice. You're right. Rushing this matter doesn't look good, the Emperor agreed with him. What do you think of all this? About the conclusion of our marriage? I have a feeling that the Emperor has already decided everything, Gracie asked Nolan as they stepped out into the hallway. Nolan asked the girl if he could be honest with her. Gracie answered him that, of course, she always wanted to hear the truth. I think this whole thing is ridiculous, said Nolan without raising his eyes to the girl. Then we understand each other perfectly. I think so too, Gracie confessed to Nolan. Do you know, Prince, why I'm still single? I don't even have a fiancé. It's all because of you. Everyone knows you're the next emperor, and my father wants to make me empress. And if he knew that I don't want to marry you, he would have fainted from shock. You've got to be kidding me? Nolan asked incredulously. Why am I joking? Not at all. I am soon going to announce to my father that I have not the slightest intention of marrying His Highness the Crown Prince. The girl answered him. Nolan was amazed at what he heard, but he believed this girl was telling the truth. This wasn't another game. Nolan found his wife at the pond. The girl was fishing. You look very relaxed, noted Nolan. Sanari answered him that if you live in a constant hurry, you won't live long. Nolan, she does bite, shouted the girl and jumped up from her seat. The fish was quite large. It pulled the girl with it. Nolan put his arm around the girl's waist to keep her from falling into the water. Scenaria was upset today. Nolan saw that. He asked me to tell him everything. Are you sad because I was invited along with Lady Lancaster to the palace? Asked Nolan. What makes you think I'm upset about this? Gracie is a beautiful girl. Scenaria answered him in a calm voice. No, nonsense you say, Nolan stammered and jumped up from his seat. The girl looked at him incredulously. Okay, you're right, she is beautiful. Nolan admitted not being able to stand the sight of her. Your Highness, I am truly relieved to know that you have good taste, Scenaria said with a sweet smile. You two look good together. I believe you'll make a great couple. And even if this marriage is an arranged one, you'll get used to it after a few years together. I like that you think Gracie is beautiful, Scenarius went on to say. Why are you talking to me like I've decided to marry Gracie? Asked Nolan with his head down. And why are you telling me this when I'm already married? Said Nolan, clenched his hands into fists. Well, I don't see any problem. You can divorce me, the girl answered him, looking him in the eye. Why did you choose to talk to me about divorce? And why are you encouraging me to marry Lady Lancaster? Her spouse asked her angrily. Well, you wish to be an emperor, and for that, you should marry a girl from a noble family, and I don't understand why you're angry at all, Scenaria replied to him. All this time, you've been working really hard to accomplish something. After you get married, you can finally relax. Just wait a little longer, and you'll be happy. Scenaria began to explain to him. Nolan pushed the girl away from him. Are you saying that seriously? Do you really think I'll be blessed with a marriage to Lady Lancaster? Do you think the limit of my dreams is to become emperor? Is that what I need to be happy? Looking coldly at the girl, Nolan asked. Scenaria froze in place, not knowing what to answer him. Nolan silently turned around and walked away. Scenaria genuinely didn't understand how she could have offended Nolan. Scenaria hadn't seen Nolan in 4 days. Her spouse had been avoiding her. The girl decided to take out her old notebook, where she had detailed her past life, and reread the story. In his past life, Nolan had to execute the girl for her crimes as soon as he returned to the palace. That's not the case now. Scenaria and Nolan have a friendly relationship. Also, Nolan should join the Lancaster alliance. This will help him become emperor. The easiest way to make an alliance with the Lancasters is to marry Gracie. Then why did Nolan get angry when Scenaria talked about divorce? Maybe she broached the subject too soon. There was a knock at the door, a woman's voice announcing that Scenari had a visitor. Gracie came to visit Scenaria. The girl never thought she would be having tea with Lady Lancaster. She had disliked Gracie before. Scenari thought to herself that lately events were very different from her past life. Maybe she should perform some actions before finally leaving this palace. I was on my way to visit the Empress and decided to stop by your place on the way. I feel like you and I have something to talk about, said Gracie to Scenaria. Did you know the prince doesn't want to divorce you? Gracie said with a sweet smile. This can't be. Finding herself in a kind of stupor, Scenaria thought to herself. Also, I want you to know, I don't want to marry a prince, Gracie said loudly. Why? You don't want to become an empress? Scenaria asked her in surprise. Did you know that the empress wasn't from this palace? The current emperor abandoned all his relatives after his coronation. He abandoned his first wife and son, his brothers and sisters. Scenaria Gracie narrated. I don't want to be in such a precarious position. I don't want to be afraid that the new emperor will abandon me, that everything could change in an instant. Gracie shared her fears. But I don't want to be an empress either. I dreamed of going to a small town and living there with the money from my divorce. Scenaria jumped up from her seat and shouted. Then we're like-minded. We'll be on the same side as you. Smiling happily, Gracie told her. Nolan has been in a bad mood ever since his visit to his wife, he thought. Demian thought as he watched the prince irritably write another letter. Damian decided to find out from Nolan what happened in the sunny palace where his spouse lives. There's a problem, only it's not me, it's a soldier. Do you want me to share it with you? Nolan asked, turning to Damian. A soldier returned from a battlefield where he had spent 4 years, and his wife suddenly wanted a divorce. Nolan began his story. And why did she decide to do this? Does the spouse give a reason? Demian asked, realizing that Nolan was now talking about himself. Or maybe she got someone while the soldier was at war, asked Liam, who had been sitting silently on the couch until then. Out of anger, Nolan gripped the pen so tightly that it snapped in half. Why should I be surprised? Her husband has been away from home for 4 years and the girl is bored, and there are so many handsome men around. Liam continued to rant, not realizing that the prince had told the story to himself. Nolan remembered the rumors he had heard at the ball. The ladies of the court had said that Scenaria and the second prince had a special relationship. No, it's too early to suspect Scenaria of treason, and my brother was just taking care of my spouse. He loves me and would never betray me. Nolan tried to calm the storm of negative emotions raging inside. Wait, you're probably talking about Her Highness right now? But isn't that great? It'll give you an excuse to get a divorce. It finally came to Liam's attention that the prince had been talking about himself and Scenaria all this time. Get out! Nolan hissed angrily. Liam didn't have to be persuaded for long. He hurried away. Prince, but you yourself have consistently said that your consort can be trusted, Demian tried to reassure Nolan. When I brought her a gift from you, I realized she was an honest girl. Scenaria spoke of you with sincerity and warmth. I thought she liked you. Why did she decide to divorce you? Maybe we should find out the reason, Demon asked Nolan. The reason? He's right. I was confused when I heard about the divorce. I didn't even bother to ask why she wanted a divorce, Nolan thought to himself. I really hope His Highness won't do something he will regret afterward, bowing his head, said Demian. I'll sign the rest of the documents later, Nolan said, and rose abruptly from the table. He took a quick step toward the exit. Nolan decided that he needed to see his wife immediately. He had to find out why she had decided to divorce. "Wait, please, where are you in such a hurry?" Nolan heard a woman's voice behind him. Nolan slowed down and turned around. Scenaria was standing behind him. "I came here to have a little chat with you." Looking into her husband's eyes, the girl said, "Let's go for a walk outside, it's such a lovely day. No need to stay in the palace in such beautiful weather," suggested the girl. As she had done so many years ago, Scenaria was amazed by everything she saw. Even ordinary things fascinated her. Nolan enjoyed watching her reactions. After the walk, Scenaria and Nolan went to a restaurant to get some food. Scenaria suggested that they finish the evening with a shopping trip. Nolan didn't like the idea, but the girl was persistent. The girl brought Nolan to her favorite store. She decided to update his closet a bit. Scenari chose a few things, sent Nolan to the fitting room. After a while, Nolan called out to Scenaria from the fitting room. He'd left his shirt on the table and asked her to bring it to him. The girl took the shirt from the table and hurriedly handed it to Nolan. The girl opened the fitting room curtain. Nolan was naked to the waist. The swords had left deep scars on his back. Scenaria realized how hard the war had been on Nolan. "I think this suit fits me really well," said Nolan as he left the fitting room. Scenaria marveled at the man's beauty. Still, her husband was quite handsome. Nolan already wanted to go home, but Scenarius had a great idea to attend a concert as well. "Those 4 years at the front must have been extremely tough, not for you," Nolan's spouse asked. "Why do you want to bring it up?" "Question for question," Nolan answered. "I want you to forget about the war. I want you to leave it in the past and live in the present and enjoy every day." Bowing her head low, Scenaria said, "I want you to realize that you are already safe. You don't need to fear enemies on every corner. You don't need to fear death. I want you to start living, to find a favorite business, some hobby. I wish you nothing but good things." With a challenge in her voice, the girl said, "Thank you so much for spending the day. Today was great," said Scenaria, putting her hand on Nolan's shoulder. "Please forgive me for the day I hurt you and left." Nolan begged Scenaria's forgiveness. "You have a reason to talk about divorce, don't you? You don't have to answer that question right away. You'll tell me about it when the time comes," said Nolan, gently taking Scenaria's face. "As you believe me, so I believe you." Nolan said goodbye and went to his palace. Scenaria remained on the threshold of her house. She put her palm on the spot where her husband's hand had just been. Even though the war was over, Nolan had a lot of things to do. He had to deal with questions about mining rights in the South. He also had to distribute the spoils of war. And lastly, he had to settle things with the Lucasters. The next day, her spouse sent Scenaria a small gift. Inside lay a beautiful necklace. Also in the box with the gift was an envelope with a note. Nolan wrote, "It was just to make the girl feel good." Nolan decided to talk to Oliver. He invited his brother to his house. "I'm glad you called me. You and I used to love coming here when we were kids, remember?" said Oliver. "And remember that house with the red roof where they say the ghost lives?" Oliver pointed his finger into the woods. "This palace has a dark history. A ghost girl lives in it. She was the daughter of Western nomads, but was forced to move to the Empire. She was brought to the palace as a gift, and when the Emperor died, she was locked in this house. That girl spent time in the castle until her death. They say she ended her life by suicide. Sad story, isn't it?" Oliver finished his story. Nolan thought that Scenaria would have suffered the same fate if he had died at the front. "I don't want to fight you for the throne. I'd rather leave the palace forever," Oliver shouted and sank to the ground exhaustedly. He bowed his head low and wrapped his hands around his knees. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this situation at all," Oliver whispered quietly. "And I have the same thing. I used to want to drop everything and run away too, but now I have someone I have to protect," Nolan told him. "Are you talking about your spouse?" Oliver asked. "Oliver, you also need to find people and things you want to protect. It will help you make good decisions," said Nolan to his brother, patting him on the head. The brothers didn't know they were being overheard. All this time, a servant of the Empress was standing behind the tree. "That little bastard said he doesn't want to be emperor? He doesn't realize that after the current emperor dies, his mother will be imprisoned. Pathetic egotist." The Empress was enraged after hearing her servant's report. "Oscar, from now on, you will always follow Oliver. You will be my eyes and ears." The Empress commanded her servant. Nolan decided to think over his tactics. There had always been many rebels around him, but once he returned to the palace, the situation became even more serious. He could be prevented from becoming emperor by hitting him where it hurts the most. For a second, Nolan froze in his seat. He remembered his weaknesses. Nolan turned to Demian and ordered one knight to be sent to the princess's palace. "By order of the prince, from today onwards, I will accompany you everywhere," said Ethan, getting down on one knee in front of Cenariah. Cenariah's brother suddenly burst into the room. "Why don't you answer my letters? Do you think I like coming here all the time?" shouted the brother indignantly. "You are a completely uncaring woman," shouted the brother and took a swing at Cenariah. Ethan stepped in front of the girl, shielding her from the blow. The brother punched Ethan in the face, ordered him to get out of the way. Ethan quickly drew his sword from its sheath. He put the sword to Cenariah's brother's throat. The girl screamed for Ethan not to kill him. "I believe the subject in question has the potential to harm Her Majesty." Though Ethan spoke in a calm voice, his eyes blazed with anger. It was scary to be around him. "Why did Nolan send this living weapon to me?" Cenariah thought to herself. There was gossip in the palace about Ethan as a very hot-tempered man. He had fought alongside Nolan. He had once infiltrated an enemy camp and completely destroyed it. Cenariah had no choice but to grab her bodyguard's arm. "Brother, leave now. I will send you an answer to your letter afterward," Cenariah shouted. "If you think you're going to get away with this so easily, you're sorely mistaken," the brother shouted, running away to a safe distance. "Ethan, promise me you'll be more restrained in the future. You won't be so quick to bare your sword," Cenariah asked the boy. "I apologize for my brother's behavior." The girl bowed to the bodyguard, much to his surprise. Ethan was amazed at Cenariah's behavior. He had imagined her completely different. It seemed to him that this girl served the Empress, so she wanted to harm his prince. But Cenariah had shown herself to be a good person today. "Do you know who Julia Parson is?" asked the Empress to Cenariah. "Of course, this is the daughter of the Honorable Earl Parson. You wish your son Oliver to take her as his wife." Cenariah replied with a slight smile. "And you, why don't you go and visit her?" Again the Empress asked the question. Cenariah understood the Empress's ploy. She wanted to force the girl to submit to Oliver's future wife. Although Cenariah realized it, she could not change anything. She didn't want to lose the Empress's favor. "Of course I'll visit Julia," suppressing a heavy sigh, said Cenariah. Cenariah and Ethan were preparing to leave when suddenly a servant girl ran up to them. She said that the prince was looking for Ethan. Ethan was surprised to hear that. Cenariah told him not to worry, to go to the prince. She would find another knight to accompany him. Ethan noticed Liam loitering outside the palace. Ethan dragged him to Cenariah, said Liam would be the bodyguard from now on. "Your Highness, I've come as you requested," Ethan shouted from the doorway. "And I didn't. Maybe you misunderstood something in the message," Nolan said in a calm voice. Ethan began to have a bad feeling. He quickly jumped on his horse and rode towards the Earl of Parson's estate. Cenariah liked the daughter of the Earl of Parson. She was young, pretty, kind. The girls spent the day well. They discussed the theater, the ballet, shared palace rumors. It was time to say goodbye. Ethan raced through the woods, looking out for Cenariah's carriage. As he passed a group of people, he heard that they were also looking for a carriage. But I wonder whose? Ethan got off his horse and approached the group of people. They were probably just ordinary robbers. He drew his sword and ordered them to tell the whole truth. One of the burglars confesses to Ethan that they are here on behalf of a man. They found a notebook of notes, but they were encrypted. Their orders are to find out from the girl what is written in the notebook. "Who's the girl who gave you such an errand?" Ethan asked the robber. The robbers confessed to Ethan that they were waiting for the princess, and this is her notebook, and it was found in the palace library by a servant of the Empress. After these words, Ethan was once again convinced that Cenariah was not an ordinary girl. She kept a lot of secrets. And the most interesting events were yet to come.